Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give people a couple minutes to trickle in. But as we do that, I will give you an introduction to Dan. But thank you all for coming and joining us for your lunchtime. So welcome, Dan. Dan has an MSc and BSc in geoscience, where he first developed his interest in geothermal. He then went on to begin a PhD in geothermal in 2021. But during this, he took a year out to join SLB, where he did research around drilling deep geothermal wells. After that project, he moved across to Ireland, where he's joining us from today, where it's apparently a toasty 30 degrees. So that seems a little warm. But there he joined GeoServe as a geologist and project manager, and has subsequently been designing and delivering geothermal projects. But he's still working on his PhDs in the evenings and weekends. So today, Dan is going to come and talk to us about his PhD work, which is on locating and characterizing potential mine water resources using depth studies, hydrogeochemistry, and geophysics. And during this, he has investigated the potential to heat a very large development in Fife based off of mine water, and is doing further work to investigate how geophysical techniques can help further reduce risks of accessing mine water resources. So thank you very much, Dan. A quick note to everyone, we are recording as usual to go up on YouTube. And if you have any questions throughout, you can either pop them in the Q&A, or at the end, we'll allow you to turn your cameras on, and then you can stick your hand up and ask your question in person, whichever you prefer. And with that, Dan, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Ali. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for choosing to spend your lunchtime with us. So I'll be talking today about my work during the PhD for trying to find and de-risk mine water resources. What we'll do is, that's not skipping. I think we got my other first technical. There we go. Right, happy days. Just to let you know, I'm not got Wi-Fi at the moment, so if things cut out, then you know why. So the outline of the presentation itself then. So I'll take you through what the rationale of the project was and the aims that we came up with for our works. We'll go through one case study, so that's the Comrie Colliery redevelopment stuff. We'll talk a bit about the site background, the surveys we did, the water analysis, and how we try to locate a potential thermal resource in the mine infrastructure there. That one was targeting a mine shaft. And then we'll move on a little bit to Dalcoran Colliery, where we done a depth study. Clodagh Gillen's been doing lots of work there on the hydrogeochemistry, and talk about my part of that, which was the geophysical surveys, and trying to locate mine workings at greater depths, so actual sort of roadways and working spaces themselves as opposed to the mine shafts. We'll discuss a little bit about what we found, and then go on to what we'd like to be doing in the future. So, rationale and aims. So this table here is from the Miner Remediation Authority's paper into drilling into coal workings, and it compiled a lot of data from lots of different projects that involved drilling into mine workings. And from the data, we can see that quite a lot of them are nice and successful. So gas monitoring, venting, water monitoring, those boreholes that are targeting and for that purpose are pretty successful. But then when we get down to mine water heat schemes, so granted there's a smaller sample number, but the percentages of successful and suitable for surface boreholes goes down to 56% out of the 18 that were drilled. So we'd like to try and do a bit of work to boost those numbers, because you guys would be the same, within the geothermal community. If we see that there's a geothermal project going, we want it to be as successful as it can be. So we're trying and close that gap, if you will. So what are the actual hazards then when we're drilling into mine working? So from our experience and um, looking in the research and in the published research as well, uh, incorrectly georeferenced mine plans are probably the main concern and what we try to address the most in this work. Um, and what we mean by this is, the maps that we use quite often can be really, really old. Anyone who's worked on these, mine water geothermal projects, you'll be working with maps that are drawn in, the 19th century and and logs that are in fathoms and feet, for example. So that can cause a bit of an issue when you start importing it into GIS and trying to georeference it there, and then also when it's got coordinates on the map, the actual maps themselves, they might not be entirely correct, which can then lead you to, hitting unmapped workings, which is not great because that takes a lot of time to remediate, and then missing workings entirely. So, you've not got a usable borehole if you're not hitting the target. There's also from Alison Monaghan's paper the unintentional creation of subsurface fluid pathways, and also there's an environmental, side to that. We can release mine gases. This work that we're about to present isn't really focusing too much on that, but it is a very, legitimate risk when you drill into mine workings. And then this sort of all comes down to improper planning. So being able to have all these things in line so that your project is still viable when you leave the planning process, if you see what I mean. So you want as much data and as much accurate data as you can before you send your exec to site to start drilling, for example. So the perceived risks, these are examples from shareholders and the general public as well, compiled by Dickie et al. And Kat Deeman and the team she was working with. And so the hazards we've listed before, they directly link into, risk to personnel, risk to equipment. So you've got the safety side of everything to contend with there. The projects and financial sort of risks, if you drill into mine workings that you don't expect, you might have to grout them up, for example. You might have to abandon the hole, remediation requirements. So, taking a lot of time to do that and spending a lot of money that, if you've got a tight budget, you might not have. Standing time, again, if you're waiting around for different things, it's going to cost a lot of money. Well failure and abandonment, that can happen as well. Thermal short circuits, that's quite a legitimate risk. But like I say, if you've planned everything out and you know how the mine workings are connected, you can sort of remediate that as well. And then you've got the environmental side. So groundwater contamination, if you've got those fluid pathways that are accidentally connecting up, you're going to have big problems with that. And then ground destabilization, that's more of a sort of shareholders and the public tend to bring that one up, which is, more than fair. When you think of coal mines, quite often the first thing that comes into people's heads, especially if they're living around them, is ground destabilization. And of course, we want to avoid that, no matter what. So with that, study aim overall is to try and de-risk the exploitation of mine water thermal resources, and the objectives that we set ourselves for the works was to actually find some mine infrastructure in data poor environments. So the first case study will be about that, and using standard techniques that are pretty off the shelf. People can access them fairly easily. And then we want to assess the suitability of ERT, so electrical resistivity tomography, for detecting abandoned mine infrastructure in a variety of environments. So we've done data poor, but we've also then gone on to do sort of more data-rich environments in terms of mine shafts and actual mine workings themselves. So talk a little bit about Comrie Colliery first. So The colliery itself is well, it's in Fife, so it's just on the other side of the Forth. And as you can see, it's a pretty big brownfield site. So you can just about make out the red line across there in the green. So it's a big site, and they're wanting to redevelop this area and put, holiday homes, that kind of thing in there. So it'll be a big user of heat because it's got like leisure centres, all sorts of things. You can have a look on the Fife Council website to have a look at that. But the colliery itself was abandoned in 1986. And the main thing here, when we started looking at this, we wanted to implement thermal energy storage into the mine shafts themselves, because you've got a huge store there. So about 12,000 cubes of water there, that you can access, you could get to, and heat up and store heat energy in there to meet the demands of the site after it's been developed. The only thing is about this area is that there is very little available data. So, for example, abandonment plans. When we were doing all the desk study for this area, we couldn't find, for love nor money, the abandonment plans. So quite a lot of this work you'll see today is actually done before we had access to any abandonment plans. They just did eventually turn up when we weren't looking for them, which is always the way. But yeah, so the actual plans there were difficult to find. The maps of the mines as well, for whatever reason, the roadways were sort of starting and finishing in the middle of nowhere with no access to them. So it was difficult to fully trust the data there. So we went and started with the desk study. So we were working with Comrie Development Company who owned the site, and they had engineers that worked for them who were actually engineers at Comrie Colliery when it was operational. So they had the coordinates for the mine shafts. They knew exactly where everything was. Also, so we believed. And then, they've been with the site since it was operational. So, we can go with these guys. It was a capped upon abandonment, and that was anecdotal. So we did actually, when we found the abandonment plans, that was correct. So shaft number 1 was capped. Shaft number 2 was backfilled with mine waste, and then it had a really big, thick concrete cap on it that goes all the way down a plug. So shaft number 1 would be the only viable. Well, it's not the only viable. You could do things to shaft number 2, but shaft number 1 was our target. Both the shafts are concrete lined, and then there's a big, thick layer, 2 meter thick layer of made ground on top of where those caps reach the surface. And that was from the Bing waste that they redistributed during the sort of redevelopment of the site. And then we also had sad logs for the shaft sinking. But because we're not drilling into the actual geology itself, we wanted to have a look at the mine shafts. That wasn't relevant for the time being. So what we did was we went out to ground truth the cap of shaft number 1. So we dug a 2 meter trench. So you can see, this is my supervisor Neil here. You can see just behind him is that stick in the ground. That's the coordinates for shaft number 1. So that's right in the middle of the shaft. So we dug down and we found a concrete pad in there. So what we did then was we took out GPR and did an electromagnetic survey, EM, and we couldn't find any conclusive proof of anything underneath that concrete. So we then decided to widen the trench out to see, if there's any other surface expressions at that 2 meter level. And then we wanted to do an ERT survey on it to get a greater amount of depth underneath that concrete pad there to see if we could, see anything related to that we thought we might really be related to the cap of the shaft. It's 47-meter long section, 8 meters survey depth, so it's a good one to get started with. And these are results here. So so this is where that concrete pad was on the surface. This area here, if you think that, we've dug a trench and it's got sort of sloped sides to it, you can see all the sort of looser material here. And that's probably what this sort of red area here is, the high resistivity area. So we've got sort of unconsolidated material with plenty of air between grains. But then at a deeper depth, so about 8.62 meters, we've got this big red area here of really high res. Well, not really high because it only goes up to 150. So it's high res in terms of the overall sort of characteristics for this bit of ground. Just to go back as well, the EM and the GPR surveys weren't great because there's in the made ground there's a lot of scrap metal because it was all mine and waste that was redistributed. So there's lots of random things, metallic things in there, like pipes, wires, all sorts. So it's yeah. So we've also got this area here of very low resistivity, which I think we'll sort of come to in a minute. But yeah, so that was the results there. So what we wanted to do was investigate this part here at 8 meters. So we widened the trench again. So this is the profile. So as it was when we did the ERT survey, and then we dug down towards this area here, the higher res. And then what we got was actually an inflow of water into the excavation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slides. But that was quite a thing to find in there. So as we went on, when we dug our trench a bit wider, we actually found these concrete foundations. Now, from site photos at the time, and with the engineers that were at Comrie, we all were very much aligned with, we reckon we found the foundations for the winding gear that were over shaft number 1. So this is a schematic of sort of what we've actually found. So there's 2 pillars. So this one here correlates to this pillar here. Just on the other side of this photo, there's another concrete pile there. And then we've got what we reckon was the wash house to the south there. And then that concrete pad had little sort of areas on it, like it was sort of, you couldn't really see much, but they were raised a little bit and they had metal sort of hoops coming out of them. They're like rebar. So the interpretation was that I think that's the shear legs for the winding gear, which, with that infrastructure, we've also got this water coming in, which I'll speak about in the next slide. There's good potential that the shaft number 1, which has a 6.1 meter diameter, which fits into that area with the concrete piles and right next to the wash house, which is where the wash house needs to be. So it needs to be right next to the shaft that the coal's coming out of, which was the original purpose for shaft number 1. So if we go into the water chemistry on the site, so what we did was we had numerous sample points across the site where we were taking samples from to look at the physical data and the chemical data as well. So we did ICP and ICP OES analysis of those samples. We've actually recently just put them in for isotope analysis as well. And so we wanted to get a good grip of where these different waters sources on site are actually coming from. So C7 is the water from the excavation there. And then C1, there's actually this yellow line here represents an underground culvert that comes through site. C3 is where that water comes in. C1 is where that water goes out. And there's good reason to believe you can actually see the flow direction of the water coming out of C7 or near the shaft number 1 is flowing down to the south. And so what we did was we took the samples there, we had a look at the physical and chemical data, and then we actually did some long-term monitoring as well. So we set up a barrow monitor up here, and we put in a diver at C7 and a diver at C1 as well, to have a look at how it reacts over the course of, I think it was about 8 months. So this is the physical properties of that water coming out of sea, all the different areas there. And conductivities are all fairly standard for, especially in this sort of site where you've got a lot of waste material in the ground there that's easily sort of transportable. But the main thing is that the water temperature coming out of the excavation at C7 at shaft number 1 was 16.1 degrees. Now, these are actually averages taken over the course of about 18 months, and that's the average temperature for over quite a long period of time. The pH was circumneutral pH, and then the ORP, so all the other water sources on site were positive, but this one at shaft number 1 was negative. And that, represents that it's not actually had much opportunity to react with oxygen or interact with the air. So that also piqued our interest. So if we have a look at everything over a long period of time, so from August to April, the green line here, that is the outside temperature. The blue line there is the temperature at C1, sorry. So that's where the culvert exits. And then C7 is this straight orange line that comes all the way across. And it's just sat there at 16.1 degrees. And then as you get over to the end of middle of February into April, it starts to get a little bit more, it starts to change quite a lot more. And we think that's potentially due to when we were visiting the site, we noticed the water level was sort of starting to drop. And so, it's a little bit more susceptible to changing in air temperature, for example, and a bit more susceptible to being changed by rainfall as well. For more details on all the Comrie stuff, by the way, we've done a paper on it also. If you want to get into the weeds of it, that's available, and it's got the same title as this presentation. So it's what we've sort of found was, so we actually think from the analysis on the water from C7, we think that is actually from the shaft number 1. The chemical data came back and it reflected water that's come from a sort of limestone aquifer, which is, the actual core measures that Comrie Colliery are targeting are the limestone coal formation. So there's a good reason to believe that water is coming from shaft number 1. We've not uncovered the cap for shaft number 1, so can't make any recommendations on actually trying to, go in and try and drill it. What I would say is do a lot more further works, such as checking with other geophysical techniques, trying to actually dig down to it, for example, and try to actually establish the location. The fact that there's water coming out at 16 degrees constantly of the ground there, that suggests to me that it's coming up from a lot deeper and it's using the shaft as a fluid pathway. The thing is with that is it means that the shaft itself is actually completely full of water, which is good because from our point of view, the more water that's in it and the sort of higher temperature it is, that's 16 degrees, the better for storing heat in there. So you don't have to expend as much energy to heat it up. So overall then, we've managed to use desk studies, ERT, and trying to talk to members of the community that were actually there when the mine was working, and we've found where we think the shaft might be, and we've also in the water that's coming out of C7 at the monitoring point, that is a resource potentially in itself. But the actual aim of this was to find to find mine infrastructure. We've not quite done that, but we have gotten a little bit further with it, further along than we were when we started anyway. So we've changed the sort of tact a little bit now, and we'll look at what we did at Dalquarren Colliery. So this site is looking at actual mine workings that are sort of deeper in the subsurface. They've got no surface characteristics. And the reason why we're working here is because the landowner we're looking to decarbonise their food production and agriculture. There's a long history of coal mining in the area. So it started in, I think, 1415, so that's the Battle of Agincourt. And then it goes all the way to 1977, so Star Wars. So there's a massive history there. And then we've got a wide range of depths actually for the mine, the worked coal seams that we wanted to see. If we get a really, really long ERT line, which we got the space for it, or nearly enough space for it in that field, how deep can we see? Can we see anything? So we set out to have a look at that. And then this is where Claude has been working and looking at the water chemistry on site and working in parallel with us, which is always good because it means an extra pair of hands when we're doing the surveys. So the subsurface data review then. So here is we've got maps of the maps of the workings themselves here overlaid onto the site. So we use these to plan out the ERT sections. The geology on site, there's a boundary through here, so it's on the southern arm of a synform, and there's a general sort of westerly dip. And we've got on one half of the site, so in the site over here, we've got the limestone coal formation, and then over here we've got the upper limestone formation. So there's a sort of split right down the middle, and you can sort of see that sort of shown by the workings there. And then also we've actually, lucky enough, we've got offset wells to have a look at where the rock head is, for example, and then the SED logs with them as well. So with all that, we then planned out the survey. So this is line number 1. So as I say, we had enough space. We've had to sort of make a bit of a compromise in places. So the line would ideally be straight, but we've had to curve it with the field itself, mainly as well because at this point here we've got a huge drop, so we can't really. It's not really navigable. So this is ERT1 along the northern half of the field, trying to target where we've got pretty much all the workings there in one cluster, and then we've also got this arm of the ERT to compare. There's not planned to be anything here, so we can compare that to where there should be sort of things showing up. And then this is the actual geological map, so you can see that down here. This is the indexed limestone, so this is the base of the upper limestone formation, and you've got the limestone coal formation there in the west. No, in the east, sorry. So this is ERT2, so we did a little bit further south, and we've taken it a bit more straight line using the space that we've got. And then ERT3 is following a footpath that goes along the south border of the site there. So these circles, by the way, are the electrodes. You can tell it was GPS was done by me because we've got a random electrode over here for some reason. So as we've gone through the results there, so ERT1 on the northern part of the site, we've got a fairly interesting set of features here. So go through it. We've got in the topsoil here, or the overburden, we've got quite low resistivity showing up. So there's a good chance that that is, sort of saturated, perched aquifers, for example, water saturated overburden. Rockhead is at 23 meters. And then we get this feature here, which is quite interesting because, at first glance, it's bell-shaped. So, when you're working in coal fields that have been active for this long, there's a good chance that you're going to have unmapped workings, for example. And it actually correlates with where the MRA have actually said, there's probable shallow workings along this part, and it actually cuts straight through the middle of our lines. And I'm not saying that's what it is, but from first glance, that's where your mind might go. Especially because if we put on where we can interpolate where the main coal, so the main coal is the shallowest of the coal seams that were worked at Dalquoran, and it's 60 meters below ground level. So it's a little bit deeper down than where this reflector is. So it's difficult to say really what it actually is. So this part of the project is still ongoing. So I'm still, going around interpreting what's in the sections, that kind of thing. So if anyone else has any ideas of what might be going on here, then please feel free to drop me a line. But so the main coals here, the parrot coal is sort of slightly deeper, and then there's actually another coal seam in the middle called the L coal that'll be between these two. But it's quite a sizable area of lower resistivity. But the thing is as well is that it looks like it is connected to that saturated overburden. So from a risk perspective, would this be a potential target? I don't think I'd want to go into there at the moment without further research. So going on as well. So this is further south. This is ERT2. In a similar place, we've got this section here. So at distance of between 230, 240 meters across. So pretty much in the middle there. And then the actual depths themselves, looking at sort of 60 meters at the base, and then it goes all the way up to just below Rockhead, at 20 meters from the that data there is from the offset well. So again, quite a tall feature here, but it's constrained. It's got a lateral constraint on it, which if you look at the darker reds around here, this is most likely intact rock. There's it stands out. And then again, we've got the main coal here, which is the shallowest of the seams that have been worked, and the parrot coal, and then again L coal in the middle. So it's a bit higher than where we'd expect these coal seams to be. Now there is the other, one of the options is that it's sort of collapse maybe. So the where the ceilings collapsed after work has ceased, or even prior to that, you might have fluid pathways through that area of sort of collapse, basically that sort of collapse structure, which is another possibility at the moment. But again, we've got these sort of potential perched aquifers and water saturated overburden here as well, but it doesn't look as connected as the previous ERT section, ERT1, but there's no ruling out that it's not connected, if you see what I mean. And then if we go on to ERT3, we've got another one right in the middle here. So again, Rockhead 18 meters, so it's below, this features below Rockhead in the middle. And again, the resistivities are pretty similar, and the actual polygon there sort of merges into the overburden. So if this is a water-filled void space, for example, there's potential that it's actually, feeding up here, coming out, or the other way around. It could have, but it's most likely coming up. Now, the other thing is that we've got a feature here of lower resistivity that stands out underneath this unit here that looks like intact rock. But again, the in-seam point levels that we've had to interpolate upwards, so there wasn't any directly next to where we've done the survey. They're a little bit deeper than the actual reflections we got here. The shapes of them are quite intriguing, I think. So, we've got one that's slightly less tall, for want of a better word, than the one in the middle. But it is, it's got a length to it, but it's again looks sort of horizontally constrained, laterally constrained, and also vertically constrained as well. Which rings bells to me to say either we've got an exceptionally transmissive aquifer or something, or we've got something that is could be man-made. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we can possibly find that out in the future. So if we map with sort of a rough map of all the reflectors of the lower resistivity zones, those circled zones, we get a well seams where they were worked. And then we've got we've actually got main coal roadways going through where we expect where we had that lower resistivity zone in ERT1. We've got an L roadway coming through at 70 meters below ground where we have ERT2. And then we've got actually two roadways. And if you look very carefully, you can see that there is a sort of northwest, southeast going lateral roadway through there, through where we had our ERT3. And also, you probably can't see it, there's a red line that goes underneath here, which is potentially a roadway for the main coal, where we've got that lower resistivity feature in ERT3 with a sort of the more laterally elongated one. So yeah, they match up, but the fact is that they don't match up with the depths. So the space, the lateral spacing works out, so that it could be mine workings, but the depths of them don't. That could be, there could be issues with how I've interpolated what depth they are at, which is, could happen. And then or potentially there's shallower workings above all these roadways that we're picking up instead. So there's lots of different sort of things that could be happening here that we need to investigate further to work it out properly. So as we're moving on, have we actually achieved our aims that we set out to do? So at Comrie, we've used historical data to inform the trial pits that we dug. We then extended the trial pits to, with the ERT data. Through that, we've actually found, water at 16 degrees coming out there, pretty constantly. There's a, combination of standard GI techniques that we've used, like water sampling, water chemistry, that kind of thing, that was managed to actually decrease the uncertainty of the location of shaft number one, but we still not actually found it. So, if you're looking for, stakeholder engagement, that kind of thing, you've got things that you can show them and a plan to show them as a plan forward, basically, how you're going to go about trying to make this resource feasible, or investigate if it is feasible. And then for Dalquoran, we're using the sort of deeper ERT. So each line was 480 meters long, and they go down to sort of 90 meters depth, which is pretty good, really. And then we found areas of low resistivity below Rockhead. We've spotted things that potentially are mine related, or if not to the colliery, then to sort of artisanal mine workings going back centuries potentially, and that can then inform as you're trying to go about realizing these resources. You've got the opportunity to say, well, actually, I don't really want to drill here, but we might investigate this area a little bit more and get some other techniques in for the future. So these are pictures of when we were doing it out on site. It was quite warm back then. I mean, the long grass was a bit of a nightmare, to be honest, in terms of actually laying out the cables. But it's good fun. Quite a lot of people, when they do these surveys, they take quad bikes, which is if you have the opportunity, then please do, because laying it out by hand is a big task. So overall, then, we managed to use a combination of techniques. We've been able to inform further investigations and reduce uncertainties, but we've not eliminated the uncertainties altogether. We've managed to identify features of interest. So at Dalquoran, I wouldn't really go about saying, we should drill these areas in like ERT1 and ERT3, for example, where you can see that sort of shape that looks like it's interacting with the overburden in terms of what might be water transfer, water flow, fluid flow. And we can't say for certain with Dalquoran what we've actually found. The same with Comrie, really. But we've got a lot less uncertainty than when we started, which that's always a sort of good sort of checkpoint. And then you go on later to try and figure out how you can actually reduce risk a little bit more. So the next steps, in my mind, would be to do other ERT surveys at Comrie, over where you think that shaft would be. We've actually done that. It's just sat on my laptop, and I need to actually get down to interpreting all these sections. Further investigate the source of water at C7. So, like I say, we've sent in for isotope analysis of the water there, and hopefully try and get a better grip on exactly where that water's come from. The water chemistry we did indicates it's mine water, the physical stuff as well, but it'd be good to have those isotopes to be able to nail it down. Again, I wouldn't recommend drilling at Comrie yet until you've properly figured out where that shaft is. And then also would be to have a look at other areas where there is surface expression of mine shafts. So there are a couple of different sites where we've gone out and we've actually done ERT over the mine shafts themselves, because they've got the winding gear over them. They've got plaques, and the people know exactly where that mine shaft is, because you can put a camera down it, or you can look down it in some cases. And that's another thing that we're currently trying to interpret and go through there. At Dalquoran, we'd like to do another ERT line sort of perpendicular to the previous line, so we can try and sort of intersect where these what's going on with these not reflectors, but like these items here. And then it would also be quite good to do another one parallel to that, to have a look at the lateral constraints of this feature here. And if you had to ask me, where would you recommend putting a well? I'd probably say into here. So you've got the solid rock over there. I wouldn't recommend drilling actual production well or anything like that, but like a test, like a narrow gauge sort of test bore. That's where I put it. If if you were pressuring me to ask. So and yeah, so that's about it really. So I'd be happy to take any questions at all. And I hope you found that useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. That was great. I've certainly written down some questions. Everyone, I think you should soon be able to turn on your cameras and ask any questions that you'd like. I can see we've got one in the chat, so I will read out that one and give you guys some time to think. But Joe Island says, thanks, Dan. Very interesting. You mentioned an energy user at the second site in Dalquorin. Have they expressed interest in furthering the study or possibly drilling a test well?
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say.
Interesting.
But
I suppose you don't have to directly answer it, Dan, but I suppose the thing I was thinking about both the sites is the studies or the business case for them can be improved, or not improved, but actually made when when you have an energy user at the end, driving the need for this energy.
Yeah.
And it's often at that master plan approach where you're trying to see, right, if there is something here, where would we use it? And then how could we further the study? But because I did see, I'm not a geologist, as you know, but I've seen those sort of interesting features. They're like, oh, I wonder if you could drill a well there. And then you suggested where you would drill it. So, yeah, I'm just wondering if you can share a bit around how you would further these studies to try and, get the details you need to maybe, what do you call it, like fulfill a future business case for something like that.
Yeah, no, because these guys, they are the biggest supplier of square sausage in Scotland. So they're wanting to go forward with it, I believe, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, I think there is plans in the future to have a look with drilling. But there's it's sort of funding, that kind of thing, to get it done really. But yeah, so there's definitely a really good business case there, in my opinion. It's just if the resource is actually viable.
Yeah, no, thanks. I remember having a square sausage one day in the heliport in Aberdeen many
Changes your
times.
life, isn't it? It's good stuff.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Dan.
No problem.
Dan, is the development in Comrie still keen or still considering looking at mine water?
I've not spoken to him in quite a while, but I believe so. But I've not seen. I've been back to Fife a couple of times in the past, years or so, and I've not seen anything actually happening there. The planning went through in 2023, I believe, but as far as I'm aware, they've not started moving or like moving forward with anything.
Kevin, you've got a question?
Hi Dan, how you doing?
Kevin, not too bad, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. I always ask this question when people can't find things underground. Have you considered cross-hole geophysics? So just shallow seismics, but cross-hole, and you don't have to worry about where the shaft is in terms of losing your rig down it. And it's something we did in South Wales many, many, many years ago. I'm not telling you how many because that'll give away my age, but everybody knows my age anyway. Those sorts of things can be really effective and they're cheap as chips.
Okay.
So, and I have to pitch for John Glyas as well. Always recommend muon tomography because he's got his fingers in that pie.
Right. Okie dokie. I think, yeah, because we've discussed that before, and I think the reason why I sort of shied away from it, I think, was because I thought that it might be quite expensive, but if it's fairly cheap and it's sort of off the shelf as well, then it'd be a pretty good tool to have, especially at Comrie. Yeah, I'll put that in because I'll be doing a similar but much shorter presentation at World Geothermal Congress. So I'll mention those points.
Thanks, Dan.
No problem. Thank you.
I've got a rig in Scotland soon if you want one.
Aye, yes, please.
Okay, I'm going to take this opportunity to ask one of my questions. When you're talking about using ERT, are you picturing, so obviously you and about half the people on the call know I work for Tamrock. Are you picturing that Tamrock or equivalent companies, when clients come to us and is interested in doing mine geothermal, that we would take out and do an ERT survey as part of our methodology? And if so, what's like, I have very little background in geophysics. What's the sort of timescale cost to run one of these, and also the learning curve to do like the interpretation that you've done?
You can get companies that do all that for you because you can subcontract. Yeah, but I think, you know, as part of, you know, being thorough and that sort of feasibility study stage and all that sort of thing, ERT surveys and other geophysical surveys are really good. They give you a lot of information that you just wouldn't have had from geological maps, that kind of thing. Especially for, you know, mines. You know, actually, the reason why we sort of defaulted to ERT is because if you've got the lateral space on the ground, now that is a limiting factor in some cases, but if you've got the lateral space, then you can, you know, you can have a look at what's down there to, you know, 100 meters like we've done here, and actually be able to say, this mine's mapped here and it is there, what's above it, and how can we sort of safely go at it, and improve the chances of drilling a well that is suitable for purpose. So you wouldn't actually have to do all the sort of data collection, all that yourself. You can,
Yeah, you could contract that to someone else. A completely,
me, for example,
well, I guess.
I'll have a go.
All right, I'll write that down then.
It wouldn't be right, but I'll have a go.
Question related to the ERT, but not the commercial bit at all. You said that your ERT in Comrie, when you were initially doing it, was a bit messed up because of the made ground and the metal, etc., etc.
Yeah, the
If it
GPR
wasn't,
and EM messed
yeah,
up a bit.
oh yeah. If you did, I know you said you've done this, but you haven't done the processing yet. Is it possible that you would see a similar structure to what you saw at Del Quarry in the shaft, if the shaft there is flooded and, you know, until you dug a hole in it, was presumably leaking water into that upper made ground? Would you possibly see a similar type shape with your sort of your blue blob, like wherever your water is flowing down towards your culvert and then into the shaft? Would that be a similar shape?
Essentially, yeah. You'll be looking for a laterally constrained, no matter what color it is or what res it is, it'll be laterally constrained. There might be a little bit of sort of, depending on the sort of how much water you've got, if it's coming out of the concrete itself, but you should have a fairly laterally constrained reflector or area. Well, the other thing is if you've got an air-filled shaft, so at Comrie you'd be looking for sort of lower resistivity because it's full of quite conductive water. You'd be looking at, if it was air-filled, you'd have a big red blob and then of really high res and then an area of much lower resistivity. So you'd be able to see it probably a lot more easily. But with that you get, you know, all sorts of artifacts, that kind of thing, because you've not got any voltage coming back.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any other? Oh, Kevin, yes, please, so I don't monopolize Dan.
Dan, I meant to say, at the very start of your presentation, you mentioned the MRA's sort of borehole survey, you know, in terms of success. And when it gets to mine water heat, it drops to 56%. What do you think the reason is behind that? Because in all effects, they're actually targeting the same areas. So why do you think, and I keep meaning to speak to Lee about it, but why do you think that is the case, that when it comes to mine water heat, it's less successful?
Yeah, this is one of the things about this sort of subject that the one of the aims was to sort of de-risk it, but in the back of my mind was trying to keep it off the shelf and fairly low cost. Because when you break it down a little bit more, it's private companies doing it tend to be more successful than councils, for example. So there's potential there that the sort of desk study and planning phase maybe, isn't as thorough as if it was, a private venture, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. I think you need your lawyer present for that one, Dan.
Oh shit.
No, it's interesting because it's, obviously I get asked questions all the time by the MRA about hitting workings, so for obvious reasons. So
Aye. Yeah, but I think there's other things, I reckon quite a lot of it is down to that, actually georeferencing the mine plans and making sure they are exactly where they were intended to be, basically.
do you think then we ought to go through, like we do with other sections of drilling, go for the low-hanging fruits where you've got really good mine plans? Everyone talks about sort of Bochum and Fraunhofer and that. I mean, they all very successful, yeah, because they got absolute bomb-proof. I mean, literally, because the Luftwaffe tried. Well, no, it's a combined forces tried to bomb the mines, and they didn't hit them during the Second World War. And that's what they've done. They've gone for really low-hanging fruits in terms of making sure they hit them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that is, when you've got much more solid plans, your chance of success in the desk study phase will, go up a lot. Comrie is one of those examples where, I wouldn't describe it as low-hanging fruit. It is in theory because, you've got the shaft coming up to the surface, but when you dig down and try and look at it, that turns out not to really be the case. So as you're going through the desk study phase, it's good to have a phase of that where you're actually going out to site and looking at the space that you're looking to develop, and establishing, is what we've done in the desk study phase all right, and then iterate it from there and just keep sort of iterating it until you're certain, and then you go out, try and drill into it.
Cool. Thanks, Dan.
Okay, I think that's us at time, so I think we'll have to bring this to a close. But thanks very much, Dan. That was a great talk and a great chat, everyone, afterwards. If anyone wants to go back and look at what Dan has done, this will end up going on our YouTube channel. And oh yes, some notes. I'm sorry I don't have a slide to advertise next month's talk, but it's going to be on the 24th of June, and it will be on CCS and geothermal. And another important thing is save the date of 8th of September, because we are going to run an in-person event in Cornwall. It's going to be sort of about the interface between geothermal and mining. And we're going to go see United Downs in the morning, and then we're going to be based at Camborne School of Mines for an afternoon of various different tech bite talks from some of the other minerals developers and geothermal developers in the area, and a few other bits. We're going to talk about our wing questionnaire that we ran, and overall have a good time and some nice networking. So I will hopefully see you. Oh, yep.
Just one thing, are you going to combine with the Critical Minerals Challenge Centre when you're down?
We haven't got any sort of formal combination, but I know we are going to have a talk from CSM, and they will some various representatives will be there, but I can investigate that if that is something that would be of interest.
Yeah, I think it would, because obviously we're looking at geothermal and brine mining as well down
Cool.
here in Cornwall,
Great.
and some other things. So it'd be good whilst you're down here. I think that'd be a good event.
Okay, cool. I will take that away and investigate that. Thank you very much. In which case, thank you everyone for coming. Thanks again, Dan, and I will hopefully see you guys in the future.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.